Good evening. It is a sheer delight to welcome you to our lecture tonight. The Reverend Melissa L. Kean T19 Memorial Lecture was created in 2021 to honor School of Theology graduate Melissa Kean, who was one of our brightest students and cherished alums. The annual lecture series has been funded by generous donors wishing to continue her work to elevate and support women priests. The lecturers for this series are selected by the school's Florence Lee Tim Oy Student Committee. And they have also provided, in addition to selecting the lecturer, a reception that follows this evening so that we can engage our lecturer in more informal conversation after the more formal talk. And what a lecturer we have. What a speaker. This evening, we welcome the Reverend and Honorable Dr. and Senator Kim Jackson, priest of the Diocese of Atlanta and state senator representing District 41 in the Georgia legislature. A graduate of Furman University and the Candler School of Theology at Emory University, she served for a decade in pastoral ministry, tending God's people, before her election to the Senate to pursue another element in her vocation. Her talk tonight, entitled Faith and the Fight for Justice, discusses the intertwining of her faith, her call to ministry in the church, and her call to a wider ministry on the floor of the Georgia State Capitol. Please welcome the Reverend Senator Kim Jackson.
I'm an eternal optimist. I'm optimistic about the future of the world. I'm optimistic about what we can do together. And I love that about myself. And it makes me end up getting disappointed a lot, but I love being an optimist.
It says, sing unto the Lord, all you earth. Show forth from day to day his salvation.
I grew up in a very Christian family, the kind of Christian family that goes to church, not just on Sundays, but any time that the church is open. I was 8 years old when I felt called to ministry, like 8. I believed the story that we were called to love each other well and that there is this God who loves us and is compassionate and desires for us to help one another and to do the right thing. Like, I just believed the story. First date that she went on with me, I sat her down and I told her, I want you to know I'm gonna be a pastor and I'm gonna be a politician.
I rise today to speak on behalf of those who are often left out. People who are poor, people who live in rural communities, people with disabilities, and people of color. I rise this morning to speak to young women. I am committed to creating a world where you do not have to go through what I went through. I am committed to creating a world where girls, all girls, get to feel safe and free to be exactly who they are.
I grew up in this really small town where everybody knows each other. I never met a gay person in my entire childhood, really. So being gay was not even a possibility on the radar. And so the idea of being gay and Christian, those things did not work together. I'm really clear that me being gay was a source of shame for my parents. Their immediate response was, this can't be real. And then their next response was, only call us if you're dying. We don't want to hear from you otherwise, and there was this kind of real closed door that happened.
Good morning, Ainsley. Well, State Senator Kim Jackson represents not only a historic shift in Georgia's politics, her life story teaches us all
Kim
something
Jackson
about
was
grace,
sworn in
servant
as the
leadership,
first
and
openly
courage.
LGBTQ state senator in Georgia's history.
Black queer woman or black lesbian priest. Like, I mean, every article started with that headline, right? Like, lesbian pastor runs for, you know, they couldn't hide it anymore. Like, not only was it like in the paper, not only was it front and center that I was a lesbian, but it was being celebrated.
Are we together? Yes! Woo! Let's have our call to worship. Brothers and sisters, siblings in Christ, I have good news. God is here. God is right here with us, and this is holy ground. Amen.
Church of the Common Ground is a church without walls. We meet outside, we don't have a building, we meet with the people.
Coffee, cream, and sugar?
I inherited, you know, it was founded 10 years before I came along. It was designed to provide church for people who sleep outside. If you go through Atlanta, you can see there are tons of churches on every corner, but for many people who sleep outside, walking inside of a church building does not feel accessible. And at the same time, those same very people long to have a membership in a church. They long to have a sense of community and belonging. This is the first place where I have served as pastor and rector, where it's just felt like I was born to do this work. I was born to be with these folks.
They said already, you've been sleeping outside for a really long time, so you ain't ever gonna do nothing but sleep outside. There been people here today who said, you know, he was always a no-good brother, and he ain't never gonna be nothing but a no-good brother. I have heard people here today say, you know, she always been a little wild. Since she was a little girl, she was just a little wild, and that's all she ever gonna be. But our gospel today says, just because everybody else done counted you out, God ain't giving up on you, and new life is possible.
It's just been wonderful. I can't imagine life without these people, because they loved on us even when we didn't love ourselves.
It said, take, drink, this is the blood of the new covenant which is shed for you and for all. Let us drink together.
That definition of compassion, if you take the Latin root and you break down the word compassion, it means to suffer with. And so in order to have compassion on someone, you have to sit with them. You have to be in community with them, you have to listen to them, and you have to feel that pain with them.
Get you together. Make sure you good. Oh my God.
Hi, Bertha.
Hi, how are you?
I am able to do this really incredible work of working with Atlanta as the poorest of the poor, people who are so poor they don't even have a place to sleep. And then I get to go across the street and work with the wealthiest of the wealthiest and the elite of the elite to try to solve that problem so that folks don't have to sleep outside.
Of course, Ainsley's gonna be calling me. All right, come on, everybody out there in television land. Welcome to the Georgia State Senate. Everybody here is crazy.
I feel like, I'm in the middle of a session right now, so I feel like it was a setup. For sure.
I set you up, but I also held your hand through the process.
Yeah.
I told you what to expect.
Did you?
Yes.
I don't think of myself as a strategic person. I am just a person who recognizes that strategy matters. So I try to surround myself by strategic thinkers like Simone to help me figure out the strategy.
But I think it's a setup for anyone, because I think people think they know how it happens and how it runs inside, but it really is a totally different animal.
Every day I'm fighting these small battles, and I'm trying to get incremental wins, really small incremental wins, to just try to be the wall that stops bad shit from happening.
The darkest parts of our history are not as far away as some of you might think. This bill seeks to prevent the teaching of truth. This bill and the process by which it was written, introduced, and ultimately may be passed, it will become in and of itself a prime example of systemic racism. A systemic racism that is being enacted before our very eyes, not in the past, but now.
Holy and loving God, we pause to give you thanks for the gift of life, for the opportunity to sit with one another and to learn and hear from each other. Give us wisdom as we seek to make laws that will help better us all. Amen. Perfect, thank you. People talk about this work as being like chess, but it feels even more complicated and more multidimensional than chess. Like,
See,
I don't even know another game that's harder than that.
I don't know. Third grade sandbox is as far as I could get with it.
I think one of the things that you couldn't prepare me for was how uncertain I would feel about who I could trust and who I couldn't trust, right? And I never know where to compromise, like when to not compromise. Like, it just feels...
Yeah, there's no HR in politics.
3 Republicans that we know will have Setzler, Moore, and Kauser. So we'll need 3 other Republicans to get that amendment passed. This is my 3rd year in elected office, my 4th session. So it means I know a lot more about what's happening around me. I'm not so lost. The newest and biggest challenge that I've found is that men in particular have not responded well to me being confident about what I'm talking about. I've had fellow legislators, like colleagues, people that I would consider friends, like look me in the face and talk to me like I was a child. I can be exactly right about what the policy means, about what the words are on the page, and people will still look at me and call me a liar to my face. I represent an extraordinarily diverse district in which many of the people who I serve are foreign-born. And so would this include coming up with measures to make sure that if someone, say, were trained in another country, that they would be able to have access to licensure here as well? Yeah.
So I've been doing glamour shots.
Oh, no, of course you have that.
Here, come on, let's do it for me. Ready?
All right.
Emma, how you doing?
You're hilarious.
One of the things I always appreciate about Kim, and I hope that I do the same thing, as we extend each other grace.
So I stand before you this day to urge you to open your ears, to hear from people that you might not usually listen to. I invite you especially to respond to the pleas of those who may look or sound, vote, or even believe differently than you.
If you're a Republican, there's a lot of Democrats that died for your freedom. If you're a Democrat, there's a lot of Republicans that died for your freedom, and we need to remember that.
On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 44 and the nays are 5. This bill having received the rest of the Constitution
The dudes who voted yes to hurting trans kids' lives are the same dudes who I'm going to need to vote yes for on something else that I actually need. Absolutely. Right? And so, like, I need those relationships.
In order for anything to move through the legislative process, one has to find common ground, right? There has to be a coalition of sorts to move anything.
You may have profound disagreements with somebody on one issue, but then you go to the next committee meeting and you think alike on them.
If you're fighting for me on the floor, but then you're able to go out and have a drink with these people after the day is over, are you really fighting for my interests?
It feels like they've turned on you because you didn't do something they wanted to do, but they're not focusing on what you did do and accomplish.
Right. When I left everything on the field, like everything.
As I stand here today, the very accusations and mischaracterizations that were hurled at me some 20 years ago are now being used to harm a new generation of children. And I want you to know that they were wrong to be afraid of us and to deny us of our dignity then, and they are wrong to be afraid of you and to deny your dignity now. You are loved by God. You are created in the image of a God who transcends any human concept of gender, feminine, masculine, and non-binary alike. Friends, You are loved.
They don't have any idea what you go through. They don't realize how much all of this rips at you. You just have to push it down, do what you gotta do, make it back to your office and cry.
Have you ever wanted to quit politics?
Oh, I want to quit politics every other day. Simone always is encouraging me to guard my heart and not let people take from me who I am. And I think that's a part of my job, is to not let either of these jobs change who I am at the core, in terms of someone who is hopeful, who does believe that we can actually make things better. Somebody asked me the other day, Kim, are you happy being a senator? And no, happy is not the word. It's not happy work. It's not fun work. But I do feel like I'm in the right place. It's so similar to the feeling that I had when I got ordained, right? It's hard. I cry a lot. It's not fun, but it just feels right.
No matter what your past has been, no matter how hard, no matter how difficult, no matter how many people have pointed their finger and called you out your name, God promises us life and joy and hope. So friends, that is all I have to offer you today, but I think that's a whole lot. I think it's a whole lot when I can tell you that there is hope.
Amen.
And that there is life. Can we say amen?
Amen.
Amen. Let's pray together, my friends.
I'm going to invite my dear friend and alum here of Swanee to come and help me. I don't know, she can't make her microphone work, so I'll just give it to her. But to help me as we kind of engage in some conversation, it'll be a little informal, less lecture, a lot more Q&A. And so Nikki's going to cue us up with some Q&A.
All right. So, again, I'm Nikki Mathis. The two most important things about me here today are that I am a proud alum of the School of Theology here, and that I am Khalil's aunt and babysitter. So, Reverend Dr. Mother Kim, could you tell us a little bit more about Common Ground? I see that it's a bit of a non-traditional role in the church, and I wonder if, so this is kind of two questions. Tell us more about Common Ground, and also could you look into your crystal ball, as it were, and tell us what you think about the future of non-traditional ministry in the church?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Nikki. So Church of the Common Ground, this film is named after Common Ground. It is the place where we come together with people who sleep outside on the streets of Atlanta to make church with one another. Our opening sentences that we say together is that, God is here. God is right here with us. And this ground where we just literally swept up human poop 5 minutes ago, this ground is holy ground. I said it in the film. I feel like it's a place that I was born to serve in a way that I could not say about other calls. And I think part of the reason that is the case is because Common Ground is this place where people that I would not otherwise know and truly know, they come and we get to be in community with each other. So it's not just a service orient, right? We don't just have church, pass out sandwiches, and the end. We make community with one another. We share each other's stories. We hear and learn from one another. And so I think over the years that I've served at Common Ground, it's really made me think a lot about Jesus and why he hung out with the people that he hung out with. And this notion of I spent a lot of time with people who were prostitutes, who were sex workers, and pretty sure Jesus did too, right? I spent a lot of time with people who were sick, who have, I think, what in the scripture might have been called possessed by demons, but what we know now today to be mental illness. Pretty sure that's who Jesus hung out with. And so it's been really, I think, rich and helpful for me to realize that part of how we be church with one another, part of how we see God in each other is to spend time with the very people, the kinds of people that Jesus spent time with. And so that's what we do. And we create community, we build trust, and then we help move people into housing. It's been this really beautiful thing. So folks trust us, they love us, they care about us. We have a social worker who's on staff. And so people who may have been sleeping outside for 10, 15 years. In fact, when I got there, there were people who were there who were like legacy. They're like, I've been at Common Ground since the very beginning, and they've been sleeping outside since the very beginning. That's no longer true. We have a social worker who now helps folks move from having no ID to an ID to permanent housing, and they continue to be a part of our community. And so now I tell people we're not just a church for people who are experiencing homelessness. We're now a church for people who have been impacted by homelessness. And many of our folks now have a place of their own that they can lock the door and be safe and then come back out and serve. They're the ones who are now the volunteers. Like they make the coffee, they serve. It's been a really beautiful, beautiful circle. My crystal ball. So I think that this is the future, the today of the church. I think that a lot of us will end up being called to serve in non-traditional roles. I hope so. I think that parishes in the traditional form of like a building and a steeple, I've worked in one of those. Those things are really expensive to maintain. Uh, we run out with a van. Well, we have two vans. One's missing a key right now. But we run with a van and some things in the side inside of a church, and we make church where people are. And I do think that that's where we will find ourselves as we continue on. And I don't know that you wanted me to speak to this, but I think you also this notion of having one vocation that is expressed in multiple ways. So thank you, Jim, for introducing me not as a bivocational priest, but as a priest who has a vocation that is expressed in the Senate. I think we're going to see more and more folks in a similar posture where they might on the Sunday serve in a kind of traditional congregation or even something like Common Ground, but then have another way that they express their ministry as they move forward.
Thank you, Kim. One of the other things I wanted to ask about was your ministry started when you were fairly young, and your vocation, especially when it would kind of just started in church, was not only to kind of draw the circle wider for others, but you kind of had to make a way so that the church kind of drew the circle wider for you. So could you talk a little bit about the progression you've seen for both for your life in the church and the progression you've seen, the change, hopefully the growth that has happened in the church as the years have gone on?
So, thanks for that, Nikki. We don't talk about this in the film, but I was the very first out person of color ordained in the Diocese of Atlanta, in the history of the Diocese of Atlanta. Never been done before. I'm also the first out state senator, so I know a little bit about being the person who pushes the boundaries of the circle, right? And what I'll say about that is.
And how old were you?
What's that?
How old were you?
When I got ordained, I was 25. I was ordained at the youngest age you could possibly be ordained. And at the time, the day after it happened, I thought, did these people trick me? They know that I don't know. So yeah, I was ordained at 25. This young, out, queer. I had a fro at the time, like very much part of like in the Black Power movement for Black lives, and it wasn't easy. I think that I struggled when I was ordained. I wasn't clear that I would have a job to go to because we're talking about so just for context, it's 15 years ago. So 15 years ago, there were just a lot of churches that weren't interested in ordaining or receiving as a priest a woman still. They weren't interested in receiving a gay person. I was gay married too, y'all. They weren't interested in that. And they also weren't necessarily interested in having a Black person on staff, right? So there was a lot of kind of hits against me. And I don't think that's where the church is today, right? Like I think today, my opportunities to express my vocation, my priestly vocation in a church setting, I think those have expanded broadly. And that churches that could not have even conceived of having me 15 years ago, certainly, would be able to do today. I think that's true. Nikki and I on the drive up, we were talking about this early experience of mine. So my wife and I,
chose to get married in Iowa. So this is how old like we go back. So before gay marriage was the law in the land, you had to go somewhere else if you lived in the South. And so we chose to go to Iowa. And at the time, I was a member of St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Atlanta, a great, wonderful church that supported me, and raised me up. Bishop Rob Wright was the rector at the time. Mother Nikki Mathis was the associate at the time. They were great.
It's historically Black.
Historically Black, just beautiful, amazing community. And at St. Paul's, the tradition is that if you get married, and whether you get married at the church or go somewhere else and get married, the next Sunday, the couple comes up and they cheer and they celebrate the wedding. My wife and I went and got married, came back, and Rob, then the rector, showed me an email where somebody from the vestry had written and said, please don't bring this up to the altar and celebrate it. And so he didn't. He didn't. My marriage was never celebrated in that way at the altar at St. Paul's, despite it being this place that had welcomed me and ordained me and all of these things. They kind of missed that piece. But the St. Paul's of today, 15 years later, who did they call when they wanted to get on the list of welcoming and affirming churches and they wanted to talk about what that meant? Well, they called Kim Jackson, the child of St. Paul's. And, so the church has changed. The church has moved. I think that drawing the circle wider, there have been so many people who've helped to push those boundaries. And I think that we will continue to do that. We still have work to do, particularly around issues around accepting trans folks within our amidst. I think we still have a lot of work there, but thank God what I experienced 15 years ago is not the church of today. And I feel very, very hopeful about where we're going.
Thank you, Mother Senator. I also wanted to ask that since your vocation has expressed itself both in the church, in the ecclesial structure of the church, and in politics, that you've kind of stretched that vocation that started in the church as drawing the circle wider out into the public sphere, so that the disenfranchised out in the public square were also brought in and given equality and dignity, and as our baptismal covenant says. Can you talk a little bit about how it is to try to do that in the face of people who not only don't believe like you, but believe the absolute opposite, that believe the way of the public square and the way, and this of course is leading into Christian nationalism, that and the way of the country in terms of being Christian is to draw the circle smaller and to make kind of a case system of these are God's chosen, here's the next level down, and here's the last level that maybe we should, get to go. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you are able to live out your vocation in the face of those realities and with those particular people?
Yeah, I think my like short, snarky answer is I just out Christian them. Like, so I have colleagues who probably would, I think they would proudly describe themselves as white Christian. They wouldn't probably describe themselves as white, but they would proudly describe themselves as Christian nationalists, right? They've claimed that banner, they take it with great pride. Colleagues who sit with me in the Senate, and, I had one of them who said to me, not too long ago, it's like, Kim, I would never wash somebody's feet I didn't know. And I'm just like, but dude, that's what Jesus is. And he's like, I know, but that's what Jesus did, right? Like, but my colleagues, like, they really do, despite our differences politically on so many different fronts, despite I think our understanding of Christianity, my colleagues really do respect me as a clergy person, as a priest. I was worried about that when I arrived and wasn't sure how that would be received, but being an Episcopalian, I think, helps because they know there's some standards to that process. I mean, there are a lot of pastors down there at the Senate. Like, there are a lot of them, but they understand that I'm theologically trained and they respect that. But also, they see the work that I do. So, what I don't think is made clear in the film is that a lot of what we do at Common Ground is literally across the street from the Capitol. So like my folks sleep in the shadow of the Capitol. And so 3 days out of the week, that's where I am, not in the Capitol, but across the street, caring for people, feeding them, washing their feet, hearing their stories, being in community with one another. And so they see me. They see me being a Christian. And I think that is, it takes some of the wind out of them when they try to make some type of theological argument about why the circle should be drawn smaller. They know they can't win with me, and I think that's been really a useful expression. I think it's been helpful. So one of the things you saw in the film is I do a speech. I'm in the well, and I'm talking to girls, right? I say, and I don't want my own experience of 20 years ago, of it's not in the film, but for context, this is about not allowing trans girls to be able to play sports. And I started the film and I started the speech by talking about how I played for the United States national team. I played team handball. I represented our country and played internationally for the United States as a gay woman. And I could not be out because at the time, 20 years ago, people who were out were kind of afraid, they were afraid of us being in the locker room, right? Because of course we wanted to like do things, right? There was a lot of talk about like we can't have these lesbians, in the locker room, and people would be afraid. And there's just like a lot of homophobia about women, and like if you're playing on the court and you're hitting somebody, or you're hitting them on appropriately, or you're hitting on them, right? It was just really, it was a difficult time. And so I remember very strongly, what should have been one of the proudest moments of my life, representing it, like wearing our colors, our flag, and being very mindful that I had to be very careful about what I did or said in the locker room. And so fast forward to the speech on the floor, I am saying to these girls, I don't want you to have that experience as well. And then I look in the camera and I say, folks, to the girls who are listening, they're actually in the gallery. So just for perspective, the camera is here, and then the gallery where these young kids are is just right above. And so I look at them and I tell them, you were created in God's image. You were loved by God. You were loved. For my own belief in the importance of separation of church and state, I want to be clear that I didn't do that during the official session and debate on the bill. I made that speech during our points of personal privilege, which is where we can go up and say anything. We can go up and tell, people will say, happy anniversary to so-and-so. My mother was born today. So it was outside of the kind of the work of the Senate, because I think that's important to make those separations. And I will say, in modeling that for folks, I have seen systematically fewer and fewer of my colleagues, my Christian nationalist colleagues especially, use the well during session business to call on God. Like I have seen systematically that shift much more to points of personal privilege than you see it on the floor during actual debate. So I think it matters that they're theologically trained folks in the Senate. I think it matters that they're theologically trained folks who are elected, who are in the public square, who are pushing, who are showing that here there are multiple ways to express who it is that we are as Christian followers, as Christ followers. And I think that really, really matters. And so I've really tried to embrace that, be fully me. There's a sermon, there is a sermon that shows up in the film. Like they respect me enough that when the person who's supposed to be a chaplain of the day, because we do pray every day, just so you know, the chaplain of the day got in a car accident and couldn't make it. My colleagues turned to me immediately and was like, Kim Jackson, can you please go up there and do our sermon for the day? Right. So they do respect that. They respect me. They respect that we have a broader theology than what gets often represented. And they actually give me space to be able to express that. So
thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I think that we would like to open it up to everybody. And so what I'm going to do so that there is full participation is we'll take the first person to ask questions. I'm going to give you the mic, and then you're going to look around after you ask your question and it's answered and give it to the next person who has a question. So, first question. All right, here we go. And I'm going to go walk this child who's still asleep. Yes.
Thank you, Reverend Mother.
So one of the things I've found in some of the dialogue work I do is that, you know, the reality on the ground, and I think the reality that comes across in the video and then in the conversation, is that we're not as divided as so much of the popular narrative makes it seem, right? Like, you know, we have conversations with people we don't agree with all the time. And I think of especially in places like Sewanee, where we are very much surrounded often by people who may think differently than we do. And yet we have to be in relationships to make it work. And so I'm wondering how you are finding yourself translating that out of your work in the Senate into the church and this into the world more broadly, because sometimes churches can be ideological silos. And I think doing that kind of work outside reminds us and gives us that gift of saying, like, yeah, here I am, and I'm, you know, I have to be in relationship with these people to make it work. Because if we're all in our little trenches, we're never going to get anywhere. So I'm just wondering about the translation in that way that you found from one sphere to the other.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And it's right. We are more divided than we've ever been, and yet if you dig deeper, we are actually less divided than certainly it seems. So I do a lot of talks in churches about the work that I do in the Senate in a very, you know, I do it not in a partisan manner, right? But I really do it in a way of talking about the common ground that we're able to find. I do a lot of storytelling about my colleagues and the ways that we are able to have relationships with each other that are genuine and authentic. And I think that's helped. I do think people are still skeptical though, right? I mean, it is a big hurdle to climb to convince people that I have real authentic and that you could have real authentic relationships and meaningful relationships with somebody who is so ideologically different or politically different. But I try to keep telling it. And then in my own congregation, right? So with people who are experiencing homelessness, so we have this tradition where we circle up for the prayers of people and we say our prayers. And usually because it's outside, I try to repeat people's prayers out loud. And my congregants they're great. They're amazing people. But the Sunday or the Sunday after Kamala Harris announced that she was running for president, somebody prayed. I pray that Kamala Harris become our next president. And I usually repeat the things out loud, right? Because I want people to hear them. And so I found myself like, wait, do I repeat this? How do I like? Because I know there are people in the circle who feel differently than this one person. And so I was like, and so I just said, you all know I repeat the request out loud. I encourage you all to pray for what you desire and ask for. And so I'm repeating this out loud so you can hear it. And then I made space for someone else to offer a very different prayer request and repeated that out loud too, right? And so I think this work of convincing folks that if we sit down and talk long enough, that we can find some common space. It's that first step of sitting down that is the real hurdle. So let me answer this way. So you saw my friend Russ, who's in the film, right? So, you know, funny, he's really hilarious. So Russ is the chair of the agriculture committee. Great guy, great country guy. I'm a farmer. He's a farmer. We get along really, really well. But one of the weird things that we have to deal with in the ag committee is about what drugs we list for different schedules. So, you know, is a drug like marijuana, is it going to be illegal, right? Schedule 1 or whatever, not gonna. So we're sitting there and I'm like looking at this list. And the reason why this matters is because if you get pulled over by a police officer and you have your heart disease medication on you, but not in your, but you know, you just got it in like a little pill bottle. You don't have your actual prescription with you. If that's a Schedule 1 narcotic, then you get arrested. You go to jail. Like you have to do drug treatment. There's all kinds of like implications. And so I raised the question. I'm like, well, you know, guys, why are we? There are a number of medications on this list that disproportionately impact African Americans related to heart disease, kidney disease. Why are we listing these here when we know good and well that folks need this medicine and nobody's abusing it? Like, people aren't abusing their kidney medication so that they can get high, right? Like, and Russ, to his credit, he didn't say anything in the meeting. But after the meeting, he came to me and he was like, Kim, I just don't understand. Why did you make it about race? My people get heart disease. My people get kidney disease too. And I was like, thank you for asking, right? Like, instead of just walking away and being like, Kim makes everything about race. And we sat down and talked about it. And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, these are issues within the white community, but let me tell you about the statistics around how it disproportionately impacts Black people. And so that's why I'm concerned. And he totally heard that, right? And we were able to carry on, and he could support me in my questioning of why we would make these things arrestable offenses.
Y'all know I'll call on you if you don't raise your hand.
My question is, I'm Julia, and I'm a first-year MDiv student. I'm also, before this, I was a social worker, so I'm very interested in your ministry. And I'm curious if your colleagues in the Senate come and participate with your ministry, and kind of like what the community, I guess like a part two is what the community looks like. I'm sure other people in the Diocese of Atlanta probably want to like support the ministry. How do you do that in a communal way that creates community and not just like we're giving you this thing and we're walking away?
Yeah, such a great question. I'll answer the second part first. We really struggle with this. How do we prevent people from kind of doing like just kind of drop in parachuting, drive-by observations of our ministry? We've really struggled with that. So when I first came, during the summer, youth groups would come every week, like just week after week after week. We'd have youth groups who would come and serve sandwiches or just do random things that were useful, I guess. I stopped that because it felt unfair to my people. What was the word again? It felt performative. That's right. So I no longer allow youth groups to do that. Instead, we have a couple of youth groups who come regularly. And so they're on a schedule. They come multiple times a year. So there are opportunities for them to build relationships. And we also have them do something that's not behind a table or with a table in between. So we've really pulled them out from behind the table. We have folks, you serve in front of the table, you're meeting folks. We don't have the kids wash people's feet because all kinds of good reasons, but we have them prep. So they put the tub of water down there and then they sit while people are soaking because they soak their feet first. And so watching a teenager figure out how to have like a 10-minute conversation while somebody's feet is soaking, it's hilarious. Sometimes slightly inappropriate. I'm like, man, you should not be giving this girl dating advice. But so we've really, I think, expanded to say we're not just doing these like drop-ins. You don't actually know anybody or have an opportunity to know anybody. I think that's been helpful in our process. But we have churches that sign up and provide lunches every week. We ask that they come, stay, serve the lunches, and also sit with people while they're eating, instead of just serving and leaving. But it's something our staff, we talk about it often. We are always wrestling with it. Because we need that help from our diocese, and we also want to protect the community and the sanctity of the community. And then your first question was
about your colleagues in the Senate, and are they supportive of your ministry or participate in it?
Yeah, so Russ has come down to church a couple of times. He's great. A few others have come down to church. Here's the political difference, I think, or maybe this is just the ideological difference. My colleagues who've come down to see what we do and to, just hang out during, it's during sessions. So people have to live in town, like they have to live in Atlanta so they can come to these things. They're like, good job being church. This is what the church should be doing. And so when I in turn say, Well, it would be helpful if we didn't have work requirements for you to get food stamps. They in turn say, no, that's what the church should be doing, right? I had a colleague who was changing the bail standards and saying like these X number of offenses, you would have to have a cash bail in order to get out of jail. And I looked at Randy and I was like, Randy, like, why are you expanding these offenses? Like, people don't have money to get out of jail. And he looked me dead in the eyes during a committee meeting and said, Kim, that's what your church does. And he's not wrong. I do bail people out, but like, that's not the work of the church. I mean, right? Like, and maybe it is the work of the church, but but it shouldn't just be the work of the church. And you sure as hell shouldn't be making my work harder by increasing the number of people that I got to bail out, right? So it's been really interesting to like watch my colleagues engage with it and to really cheer it on. And folks have even given money, but to really segregate that out and to say like that should be the work of the church, and government is something else. And my response is like, as a Christian, but as also just as a citizen, I feel like we have a responsibility to care for the people, and the largest organ, the largest entity that we have with the most dollars and most power to do that is the government. Like the church can no longer run the hospitals. We used to, remember? Like we used to run all the hospitals, but we can't do that anymore. And if you're down in Atlanta and something really bad happens to you, you need Grady to care for you. And that requires government dollars because that's where the dollars are. And so that's where the disparate, like where it gets disparate or where we get different is trying to figure out like whose responsibility this is. But they do love it. They come down, they're happy. And let me tell you, my congregants, when a senator comes down to visit with us, they are so excited. Because like when else do they ever get to engage with somebody so powerful, right? Now they'll talk about them because they'll look them up. They'll talk about them behind their back. They really are super excited when a colleague comes down, or they're super excited to introduce me, right? And be like, this is my pastor, and she's a senator, because it matters. They get to kind of touch that power and hopefully have some influence. Yes.
You don't have to borrow, so easy. Hi, my name's Mackenzie. First of all, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to us like this. What I'm curious about is it seems like you put a lot of yourself into the work that you do, and I'm curious how you sustain yourself in your ministry.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't always do it well. I will say that. I have a beautiful little baby boy who's a sleep stiller. So that's both a plus and a minus for helping me. I live on a farm. My wife and I have a little farm that's really grounding for us. I got a phone call from a journalist the day after I was elected, and she was like, hey, I'm calling you. I want to interview you about this historic race that you just ran. You just broke, the rainbow ceiling. Can we talk about it? And she's like, what was the first thing, that you did this morning when you woke up? And I was like, well, I went and I milked my goat because she doesn't care. Yeah, so there's something really grounding. I think that helps me with that. It helps that, I leave the city. We don't live in the city. We live out, not in the country, but we live far enough out that I feel like I have some distance from the work. And then I have really great friends. I have a great colleague group. Mother Nikki is in that colleague group. We've been in the colleague group for what, 10 years, probably? 12 years? 12, yeah, 12, yeah, based on her son's age. So colleague group has been, if I'm highly recommend colleague groups. I've had multiple ones over the years, but there's been one that's been like true staying power. That's been very important to just kind of help grounding me. And then I just have a great team of people around me, and we take timeouts. And we take timeouts with different people. So, some people, I've got a guy right now who is just like, he's on that nerve of mine, and his behavior reminds me of my 3-year-old. And he's just on that nerve. And so I said to my colleague, Sharitha, I need a timeout. I can't handle him. He's got some real issues here, but like, I'm not my best self with him. So can you tag in? And she does, and I do that for her, right? So we've really built, I think, a good team to kind of share and to name when we need help. And then I think finally, like, there are literally days where I just go to my office in the Senate and get under my desk and cry because it's just hard and it's sad. And when I lose on the floor, oftentimes that means that somebody really, really loses, right? It's people's access to food, it's people's access to healthcare, it's children's access to be able to get the medications that they need, right? Like, so sometimes I just have to crawl under the desk and cry. Maybe I should try not crawling under the desk, maybe, but feels better, more private. So, thanks for that question, though.
Thank you for all this. This is really wonderful. What are the skills that you think are needed for the kind of non-traditional ministry, non-traditional church, or the kind of vocation that's expressed in all these different ways? What do you think are the skills that folks need for that?
The skills needed. So I think you learn a lot of them in seminary, honestly. Like I think pastoral care skills, like that's probably the thing that I lean on the most of in both of my jobs. Like the Senate is a whole lot of pastoral care. It really is, like, and this is also, I mean, I think, to the earlier question about how my colleagues respect me as a priest. So when anybody has a relative who dies, whether they are blue or red, it does not matter. If you are a member of the Senate, now I don't care about the House, that's just something to know. But if you are one of the 56 who are in the Senate, I am going to call you and I will talk with you and I will visit with you just like I do with my parishioners when someone that's close to them dies, right? Like, just I am priest inside and I am priest on the outside. Like, and though I think those skills, those gifts that we have in this vocation of being able to sit with people and be with people in different difficult spaces is a really important skill to hone. I think also being able to, I think for me, one of the most important skills that I've had to use on the street, especially, is being able to exegete text well. So my folks who attend Common Ground often are coming from like super traditional backgrounds, right? Like they grew up in very conservative families. I mean, that's why they're still going to church, right? Like that's why they're still committed to it because they're afraid they're going to go to hell if they don't come. So Bible study, like, I mean, I find myself working hard at Bible study to help come up with new ways for them. Really, is teaching them how to exegete text in new ways, right? And it's just been really important. And it also happens in the Senate. Like there are times. So I once did the Chapel in the Day, and I preached the sermon for the Chapel of the Day about the woman who, Jesus basically calls a dog. Not basically, he does. He calls her a dog, right? And I had colleagues who came up to me afterwards and was like, "What's the chapter and verse on that again?" Now, and like, help me understand that text. I've never heard that text read that way. Never heard it interpreted that way, right? So being able to exegete text has been super, super important in my job of being what my wife says. I am a public Christian. That is my job, right? I'm a public professional Christian. And so those, I think, two skills, especially pastoral care, being able to sit with people just where they are, whether that's in a full state of psychosis in which NASA is controlling their brain, or in a full state of like, I am a state senator whose son just died and I want to die myself, and sitting with them, like that's been really crucial. And then really being able to, it's not just being able to exegete the text myself, but it's being able to teach people how to begin to exegete the text themselves has been really important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Chris, and I'm a layperson in the Sewanee community, and I'm on the Social Justice Committee at my church, St. James. And I have a couple of questions. The first question is, how does the Episcopal Church financially support your street ministry? And then also, I loved your term, out Christian. How did you out Christian
your fellow parishioners when they did not celebrate your marriage?
That's a great question. So the Diocese of Atlanta, the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta, which is where we are, they support us financially by paying for my salary. I don't have to fundraise that, which is a real blessing and a gift. And they maintain the insurance on our vehicles, which is great because our catalytic converters have been stolen multiple times. And the key, I didn't report that one. So that's how they support us in that regard, like financially. It's been really, really helpful. They also do our books. So they like maintain kind of the back end stuff. So the health insurance for my staff, all that. We pay for it, to be clear. Like we raise the money for it, but they do all the administrative pieces of it. And then the broader Diocese of Atlanta supports us we do lunches every Sunday. And it's a church in the diocese that provides those lunches. It's 80 sack lunches. We have very specific instructions. No bologna, never bologna. Do you eat bologna at your house? A few of us do. My mama does. But it's not cold. She eats it fried, right? Like, so we've got like some pretty specific instructions about how our lunches, like we want people to have good lunches. So the diocese individual churches provide us with lunches all year round. We also do sugar, hot chocolate, and coffee. We serve tons and tons and tons of it. And often that comes from parishes throughout the diocese. They kind of bring those things in for us. So that's that question. And then how did I out Christian the people who did not celebrate my marriage? I mean, that feels competitive in a way that doesn't feel quite right. I just kept showing up. I just kept loving them. It hurt, right? It did. And my wife was really angry. But I just kept loving them because I knew in my heart of hearts that they loved us, even though they couldn't celebrate us. And I think they were embarrassed, actually very similar to my parents. I think that if we had gone up to that altar and been celebrated, they would have been embarrassed by it. They would have felt some shame. And I think I could sense that, and I let it go. And I just kept showing up, kept loving them, kept being my same like queer self. And if you show up long enough and you're nice enough and kind enough, they'll love you, And so I think I didn't let it make me sour and angry. And I trusted that God's presence was still amongst us and that we could smooth through and find our way. And it took 12 years before they really could call me back as like, and with pride. And like, they even like advertised to their neighborhood that, Senator Kim Jackson, first out state senator, like was coming. Like, it took them a while to get there, but they got there. And I think I knew they would if I gave them enough time. Yeah, thanks. I'm back.
Hi, Walker.
Hi, Walker.
I think there are a lot of churches that are really interested in feeding people, do that really well. I have seen a number of churches really struggle to shift gears to start to ask the question, why are these people hungry? Which to me is a shift into a political question in a different kind of way. And so I wonder what you might have to say to clergy and lay folks who are running successful food ministries or other kinds of ministries where they're addressing a need, and how to get those congregations to start thinking about, well, why do we even have to do this?
Thank you so much, Walker. Is that right? Yeah, thank you for that question. So it's what justice is. It's what doing justice is, right? So people who have really great feeding programs, which I am one of them, we do great charity. Like we do it well. People get well fed, their feet get well cared for, they get brand new socks, 10 pairs of socks if you want, however many socks you want. We have them free flowing, right? And we need charity right now because there are people who have real need, they're real hungry. But I try to encourage people when we talk about you have a justice committee, doing justice is about walking upstream to figure out why this is happening and asking the question and then not being afraid of going to find the answer, realizing that most likely in order to find the answer, you're going to end up in some type of public square situation. You're going to end up in front of a city council people. You're going to end up in front of elected officials. And some of those elected officials will be partisan because that's the nature of where we live, and not being afraid of that. Um, and being really clear about the gospel calling us to do justice. It's actually not the gospel. It's in the gospel too, but right, like it's in Micah. We are called to do justice, not just charity. And so, but I think there's a lot of, for many people, even if they ask the question, why are people hungry? The answer scares them because they don't know how to wrestle with the tension that will show up in their parish undoubtedly when they start talking about, let's go to our city council and engage in politics. But politics is really just about how we organize, how we order the people, right? It's about people. And so I think folks need some courage around this issue, but also people need to get really clear in their own hearts and in their own theology about why we are called to do this work in the public square, right? I know I'm in an Episcopal seminary, but there's a dude named John Wesley who talks about reading the Bible in one hand and holding the newspaper in the other. I think there's something that we can learn from that, right? And then really pushing, I call it going upstream, right? Going upstream to say, let's stop this. I am tired, like absolutely fed up with having to take care of people who were sleeping outside, who had IEDs and were in special education classes when they were children. I am fed up with it. We knew when they were 5 years old. We knew when they were 10. We knew when they were 21, and we sent them away with a certificate that they would not be able to necessarily care for themselves on their own. We knew it. And as a society, we failed them. So what do I do in the Senate? I work hard to make sure we create some stopgap measures. After 21, you can't go to public schools in Georgia anymore. We're creating programs, we're creating opportunities to fill in that gap because way too many of my parishioners who sleep outside today, they have developmental disabilities. And we knew it all along. And so I hope that people come. The last thing I want to say about this, Marshall, I think that people don't get there when they're just feeding and not having conversations and developing stories, right? Like if you're just feeding people, you can kind of come up with your own narrative. But if you start feeding people and then you hear over and over again that the people you're feeding have developmental delays, then hopefully something triggers in your brain to be like, wait. Like, or if you're feeding a lot of people and you're hearing that they're coming straight out of prison with no ID, no social security number, and no access to money, hopefully that triggers you because you've heard their stories, right? You've done more than hand them food. You've heard their stories and let those stories help guide you in the direction of how you want to go upstream to help them. I hope that answers your question. I guess I've answered all. Oh, there's one over there. Can you holler it out for me?
I'm Roland. I'm a student in the college, so not in the School of Theology. And I'm not really pursuing theology, but the Word of God and faith can be great lenses for justice. And on campus, we have issues of justice being this room itself with the portraits of Confederate generals surrounding us, and all the other Confederate monuments we have around campus. This is an Episcopal school that's clearly not following Episcopal values. And so I'm curious when we are trying to address these issues on an Episcopal campus or on any campus, how can faith guide us through that, and what role should the Episcopal Church itself play?
Thanks for that question. Thanks for that work, and thanks for coming from the college. Like I'm excited. So a couple of things. One, I graduated from Furman University, which, if you don't know, Mr. Furman was the pastor who wrote the explanation for the Southern Baptist Church as to why slavery was good. That's who Furman is. Furman's not going to change their name ever, right? Like it is Furman, but Mr. Furman, Reverend Furman, that's what he did. And so I think some of the work, and I know Swanee's been doing this too, but some of the work of really digging through that past and naming out loud, like, hey, this is a part of our heritage. We denounce it. We also want to make sure we put our money where our mouth is to make sure that we fund things that are that help to. Let's call it reparations that help to repair some of that damage that's been done, I think is really, really important. And in a place
like Swanee in a place like Furman. Furman was a Baptist college founded on Baptist principles, right? If that's your core, going back to your core to name, like, here's what Christ's values are that don't align with this, and just using that, right? Like, it's different when you're in a secular college that doesn't have those types of roots. But when you're in a place like this that has clear Episcopal roots, I would say clear Christ roots, never mind that being Episcopalian, right? Just clear roots in Christ and who Jesus was, then it is important to use the scriptures to talk about values that we share as Christians, about our care and dignity and respect of all human beings, to do the work to begin to tear down some of those statues. I mean tear down physically, but like, get them moved, and to help move the seminary. I think it's important and it's useful. And I think there are a lot of tools available for you to do that work. And I'll just say, as a Black person, you can take down all these Confederate generals all around me, but if you don't do anything to make sure that there's accessibility for people who look like me at this school, I don't really that didn't really help, right? So I think the work has to go beyond the aesthetic. Aesthetics matter. I received the brochure for the University of the South, and I said, it's called the University of the South. Clearly, it's not for me. Like, immediately. Because I was a little Black girl from Calhoun, South Carolina, who knew that the South was rising up and did not support Black people, right? So instead, I went to Furman because I didn't know who he was. So hide it better, maybe? I don't know. I'm just like, yeah. So, but I really appreciate that you all are doing that work of trying to really begin to pull back the veil and name the sins of the founding, the sins and we do this in the church more broadly too. I think bringing light to that is really, really important. But it's not just the exposure. It's not just the taking down of the statues or taking down of the pictures. There has to be more follow-up that says, okay, our scriptures compel us to take these images down. But what's more is our scriptures compel us to do justice, which has something to do with reparations, that has something to do with making sure that we don't repeat the sins of the past. I think that's really, really crucial. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you so much. We are so grateful to you for being here. There is a reception that follows that I hope you all will take the opportunity to say hello to the senator more directly face to face and ask any questions that bubble up between now and the lemonade over there. Thank you all for coming tonight.